Hello everyone, Father John from St Heliers back again and wishing you at the beginning of this Easter a very happy Holy Thursday. The actual celebration of Easter begins tonight. It's called the Triduum, the 3 days of the Last Supper, Good Friday, and then the celebration of Easter. It's very important to realise that this is one great feast. And if we focus just on one part, for example, the death, we miss out on the Last Supper and on the resurrection. Likewise, if we focus on either of the other two. So tonight we enter into the Easter experience and we hold all of these three together. As we do so then, I would like to invite you first of all, before you listen to the rest of this homily, is to read the three readings which are laid down for today. The first reading about the Passover, the second reading about the Last Supper from Paul, the third reading about the Last Supper from John. So let's begin. To understand the Last Supper, we need first of all to look backwards in order to look forwards. And so if we look backwards, we will find that meals form an important part of Jesus's whole ministry. He goes from town to town, and the people there experience him and the beauty and the wonder that he brings. And at the end of the day, the people who had never spoken with each other, tax collectors, sinners, ordinary people, everybody sits down at table and realizes that there is something wonderful going on. From Jesus' side, there is a double identification. He identifies completely with this people whom he loves and whom he is trying to restore. On the other hand, he identifies likewise with the kingdom of God that he brings. And particularly each meal is kind of an anticipation and a fulfillment of what the kingdom of God might mean. A kingdom of peace, a kingdom of hope, where everybody can sit as equal persons at the table. And so for the people, again, an experience of Jesus in all his wonder and celebrated at a meal. And so we have this trajectory which the disciples share in and share both the identification with the people and the identification with Jesus and his kingdom. And he chooses to come to Jerusalem. He chooses to come at a very special time. It's the feast of the Passover, the great Jewish feast, and have a thought for the Jewish people who will be celebrating this great feast in New Zealand and across the world. Pilgrims would come from everywhere, and amongst them, I believe, there would have been those who had sat down at table with Jesus. These people, and maybe others, greeted him when he came down from the Mount of Olives as the Messiah. And as Jesus, I think, knew and deliberately came to Jerusalem, he knew he would be put to death. It was his choice. There, in that context, he celebrated his Last Supper. Let's turn now to the Last Supper, and you will have two readings, the second reading and the Gospel, to reflect upon. The first of all is the Passover. It's a feast of liberation from slavery and looking forward. It's a feast of coming to terms and reflecting on who we are and where we hope to go. Jesus sits down with his disciples and does precisely that. There is again, and we see it in St. Paul particularly, a double identification and then a series of instructions. Let's listen to Paul. This is my body, which is for you. Do this as a memorial of me. First identification. This is the cup of my blood, the blood of the new and eternal covenant, God's binding, God's very self with his people and opening up again the kingdom of God. Jesus' life poured out, identified totally. As we look back, we see in this the very identification of Jesus with the bread and the wine, which invites us to do the same and to honour him in that way in our Eucharist today. That's one identification. When we turn to John, we find Jesus identifies himself as a slave. And in that community, in the community, he takes off his clothes, wraps a towel around him, and takes on the figure of a slave and washes the disciples' feet. That picture where he reverses the very social context of this. He, the awaited Messiah, becomes and identifies slave with the slaves in the community and tells them likewise to identify with those and to wash one another's feet. As I have done to you, so you must do one to another. This double identification and the double command of Jesus to his community, do this in memory of me, not only the meal, but likewise together with this, the washing of one another's feet, and then his other command, love one another as I have loved you. How do we do as a church in this way? I think we can say that our community is a work in progress. There is a deep identification as the community of St. Ignatius. Do we honour Jesus in our celebration of his body and his blood and enter into the covenant which binds us so deeply to God together? Do we identify likewise with the kingdom which he brings, the double identification that Jesus identifies with too, for the hope of a world free from hatred, free from violence, free from suffering, a world where people are focused on the common good and on healing and on hope for all, where everybody can sit at the table? On the other hand, as a community, do we achieve the command, love one another? Do we wash one another's feet, metaphorically, but also acknowledging the quality of relationship that he invites us to and says, do this as I have done to you. So we come to the virus, and we come to our lockdown, and we come to this strange Easter celebration. It's only when we get to these things and see this double identification of Jesus in his Last Supper and his instructions that we can come to understand and celebrate the memorial of his suffering and death tomorrow. To repeat again and again, Happy Easter, everybody.